Okay, let's get back into this. So, as you can see in the chat, I just took some time to link just some resources for if anyone's interested in learning how to do what I'm doing right now. It won't really teach you how to do like the 3D modeling and how to navigate the view space and all that, but I would definitely recommend at least grabbing yourself one of those color palettes because what am I trying to say here? Because this is extremely useful if you want to keep I don't know, just if you're an artist, grab a color palette, okay? Just use that website, grab a color palette. If you want to learn how to texture paint, then go to that I can't remember his name, Ryan King art tutorial. It's a very good tutorial. It'll teach you like it's an hour long. It'll teach you a lot. If you want to learn to do the pixel art stuff, now when I say pixel art, I kind of mean like this. I mean it in two different ways. The first way I mean it is, if you notice this grid behind me, or not me, but like behind my objects here, you'll notice that each of these pixels line up exactly with that grid, and I guess that's what that pixel art tutorial is all about, to get that pixel perfect grid so you can do whatever a real pixel artist does, right? I do it a little bit differently. I kind of realized that yeah, I don't really use this grid like at all, so I'll show you how I do my way. And then the last thing I just wanted to label down here was the tracks you're listening to. So I'm currently working on this little, mega mix project. Take a bunch of just a bunch of tracks from like the various Mega Man games and then remix them around. So suffice to say, I think I've been spending a little bit too much time on the classic series, and I honestly forgot how good the X series music is. So those are linked down there. Those tracks are not released yet, but I don't know. I'll get around to it, to be honest. So probably next week I'll start working on them now that the classic series is almost done. So just give me 1 second here, and we'll just start this little this live stream. I don't think anyone's in here or watching, so I really don't. I don't know. I don't feel like pressure to kind of perform and explain everything. So with that being said, actually, I'm gonna pull up some SCP stories because I've literally just thought of this like on the fly right now. Yeah, I'm gonna listen to some SCP stories because I love listening to those when I get in the zone and just really get into it. Right? I figured I'm spending way too much time trying to explain every step, and kind of fumble over myself, and I kind of just it's terrible. Okay, it's really terrible. If you want to learn how to do what I'm doing, yeah, you can ask me, but you're probably better off looking somewhere else, to be honest. I'm a terrible teacher. But with that being said, I'm gonna mute myself, shut up, listen to this. Oh, I gotta link this guy too then. I'm gonna shut up, link these SCP stories that this exploring series guide reads, and yeah, I don't know. I guess it's gonna be a much more laid back stream. You'll probably expect me to talk a lot less, to be honest, unless there's something I urgently want to explain. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'll just get into this. I'm just gonna link his playlist down below, and I would definitely recommend listening to these because they're really awesome, to be honest. Like, I'm addicted to these. Okay, enough talking. I'm gonna shut up. Let's just get into this.
Secure, contain, protect. These three simple words comprise both the initials of the SCP Foundation, as well as the Foundation's steadfast motto. But what is the SCP Foundation? This video will continue under the assumption that this is the first time you have ever heard of SCP, and are about to enter a world of the strange, shadowy, and unusual. By the end of this video, you should have a decent grasp of the basic concepts that make up the Foundation. To begin with, the SCP Foundation and universe are primarily associated with a single website, the SCP Wiki. Rather than having lore spread across movies, books, or video games, the website is driven by community submissions. Practically anyone can write and add to the SCP universe, assuming their writing is up to snuff, and because of this, there is no official canon. Another way to look at this is that everything is canon, as any submission to the lore is equally valid, or invalid depending on your perspective, but there are a number of concepts that are generally accepted by the community, and that's mostly what this video will be based on. For a simple example, the SCP Foundation is most often presented as a shadowy organization that works outside of the public awareness in order to keep things secret and safe. However, if an author wishes to change this perspective and present the Foundation as a very open and public group, they can do so. Whether or not such a perspective will be accepted by part of the community is a different matter, but overall, canonicity is a fluid and often debated topic within the SCP community. So, as mentioned, the SCP Foundation is a well-funded and staffed organization that generally works outside of public awareness and operates with or without the approval or support of local governments. The Foundation often recruits the finest scientists, researchers, engineers, and military agents that they can find, employing them to perform stressful and generally dangerous tasks. These tasks are of course related to the Foundation's motto that I mentioned at the start: secure, contain, and protect. Within the universe that the Foundation operates in, which is most often presented as our own universe, there are a massive number of strange, paranormal, and anomalous things. These things, which bend or break the natural order of things as most people know it, can vary wildly in concept, form, hostility, usefulness, and danger. Without getting into too many details at this point, these anomalous entities can range from immortal killing machines to a six-sided die that occasionally lands on a 7. Some can be used to greatly benefit the Foundation, such as pills that can cure any disease, while others continually threaten both the Foundation and all life on Earth, such as massive eldritch entities for which the Foundation has no idea how to contain. Each of these entities, or at least the ones known to the Foundation, are given an entry on the website. These entries, known as Special Containment Procedures, or SCPs, generally follow a similar format and contain information written and cataloged by researchers working for the Foundation. Each SCP is given a number, and at the time of this video there are nearly 4,000 SCPs logged in the system. Next, each SCP is assigned an object class, which is a somewhat broad indicator of how easily an SCP is contained, or how reliably it can be contained. There are 4 main object classes used across the Foundation, although occasionally others will crop up. Safe class SCPs are those that are most easily contained, with little to no chance of a containment breach occurring. It's important to note that safe can apply to SCPs that are harmless or beneficial, but also to SCPs that are incredibly dangerous, but easy for the Foundation to contain and protect. A key that can open any lock it touches, and a cooperative individual that can manipulate reality are both safe SCPs. One step higher is the Euclid object class, signifying the broadest classification of SCPs, where containment is more complicated and or less reliable than safe SCPs. Many autonomous or living SCPs are classified as Euclid due to their inherent unpredictability. A red disk that can transport someone to an alternate dimension, a humanoid that kills all plant life around him, and an orb that continually expands the interior of any building it's placed in are all Euclid class SCPs. Keter SCPs are those that are excessively difficult to contain for one reason or another, and often are incredibly dangerous to either the Foundation or others, although that is not always the case. An immortal reptile that hates all life, a highly infectious disease that takes over its host to spread itself, and a cake that infinitely duplicates itself are all Keter class SCPs. Finally, there is Thaumiel, highly classified SCPs that stand apart from the others, generally due to their use to the Foundation in locating or containing other SCPs. Among the basic object classes, Thaumiels are the rarest, reserved for the most guarded secrets of the Foundation, and are generally more difficult to define than the others. A facility capable of rebuilding humanity after an apocalypse, and a machine capable of sending individuals into the future are both Thaumiel SCPs. After the object class is listed, the following information for each entry is generally the special containment procedures, meaning the steps and processes the Foundation goes through in order to keep the entity contained. These containment procedures, of course, vary wildly, ranging from simply putting the safest SCPs in a drawer to lengthy procedures featuring strict rules and unique restrictions, to some SCPs that the Foundation has no idea how to contain. The containment procedures are listed before the description of the SCP to emphasize the importance of containment above practically anything else, as that is the fundamental purpose of the Foundation. Some SCPs are kept in the same location where they were found, isolated and quarantined due to certain circumstances, and others, such as exceptionally cooperative humanoids, might be allowed to freely roam a Foundation facility from time to time. Due to the unique nature of each individual SCP, each containment procedure is also unique, and there is no standard set of rules. Following the containment procedures is generally the description of the SCP. This description is usually written with a very technical and scientific tone, describing the appearance and anomalous nature of the SCP. Again, this description section varies wildly, ranging from a few concise sentences to many paragraphs of detailed information. In addition to the description, many SCP entries will also include information such as where and how the SCP was first located, testing logs, exploratory logs for SCP locations, interviews, and any other information deemed important. SCPs are often found by members of the general public, causing the Foundation to come in and contain the anomaly and also wipe the memories of witnesses. Sometimes only one or two agents of the Foundation might be called in to retrieve an anomaly, but often a whole team of highly trained individuals will be necessary. These teams, known as Mobile Task Forces, or MTFs, consist of ex-military or other trained combatants that are often sent in with minimal information about the anomaly, and are thus forced to be prepared for anything. Some MTFs will be assigned to constantly watch over certain SCPs in case of containment breach. Once the SCP is secured and contained, researchers assigned to the project will often carry out a number of tests and attempt to gather as much data as they can. Of course, for many SCPs this is more dangerous than it is worth, so testing is generally limited. Although there are rare occasions where the Foundation will seek to destroy an SCP rather than contain it, this is not their primary directive, and the idea is generally frowned upon. One of the primary ways that researchers test and interact with SCPs is through the use of D-Class personnel. D-Class individuals are used throughout the entire Foundation, and are personnel that have been deemed expendable. D-Class are generally taken from prisons across the world, usually convicts guilty of violent crimes, but the Foundation goes through a large number of D-Class and will sometimes take them from other sources. For particularly negligent or heinous behavior, some Foundation employees might be demoted to D-Class. D-Class are often used for experiments and tests related to SCPs, serve as first explorers for some unknown locations, or forced to carry out any activity that the Foundation would rather not risk the minds or bodies of its employees on. On the other end of the spectrum is the O5 Council. The O5 Council is shrouded in mystery, believed to consist of 13 members, and they oversee the entire Foundation, with access to practically all of its secrets. Many rumors have spread about the O5s, including the rumor that they use their unlimited access to SCPs to maintain immortality. Below the O5s, but still with a large amount of responsibility, are the Site Directors. The Foundation operates a large number of facilities around the world, primarily functioning as prisons for SCPs, and each one is overseen by a site director. These facilities vary in size, with some just built around 1 or 2 SCPs, and others housing hundreds of anomalous items. There are, of course, other organizations besides the Foundation that have taken an interest in anomalous objects. These groups of interest range from the mischievous to occasionally cooperative and the openly antagonistic. The Chaos Insurgency is a splinter group of the Foundation that attempt to obtain as many SCPs as possible. The Church of the Broken God is a religious organization seeking to resurrect a shattered deity, and the Global Occult Coalition is a counter-organization to the Foundation, dedicated to destroying SCPs and backed by the United Nations. There are a number of other organizations out there, with some of them responsible for creating SCPs themselves. The Foundation has worked with some of them on occasion and continually battles many others, but each organization continues to operate, largely in secrecy. That's a basic summary of the SCP Foundation and the universe it exists in. At this point, if you had never heard of SCP before this, you should be fully prepared to access the website and begin discovering all the different SCPs known to the Foundation. While there are many arguments about the best place to start reading, each SCP entry is generally meant to stand on its own. In addition to each of the SCP's entries, there are also a great number of tales on the site, which feature much less technical writing and provide unique perspectives on different SCPs or aspects of the SCP universe. The SCP Foundation and the thousands of entries appeal to many people for many different reasons, but primarily the SCP universe is strange, unusual, and unique. SCP-093 Red Sea Object. In a universe of eldritch destroyers, inexplicable phenomena, and marvelous creations, it might be surprising that one of the most interesting and evocative of the SCPs is a small stone disc that changes colors. SCP-093 is one of the earliest SCPs to be written up, and yet it continues to fascinate newcomers years later. Many SCPs are interesting because of their descriptions, their forms and functionalities, while others, such as 093, are interesting because of the extras added on, such as addendums, interviews, or in this case, exploration logs. SCP-093 is a lengthy report, but I suggest reading it for yourself to get the full experience. If you're just interested in a summary, or an explanation, however, keep watching. SCP-093 is a stone disc, generally red, that can comfortably fit into most palms. Unknown engravings and symbols cover the disc, and the color of the disc will change when held by an individual, with the color believed to be based on the regrets held by the holder. The disc also has an anomalous attraction to mirrors, and when not held or attached to a mirror, the disc will rapidly move towards the nearest mirror, building up immense speed and smashing through any obstacles to get to its destination. Despite this speed, upon collision with a mirror, neither the mirror or the disc will suffer any damage, and the disc will cling to the mirror. Most notably, however, is when an individual holding the disc places it on a mirror, upon which they will proceed to move into the mirror, traveling to an alternate location. Upon learning of this, the Foundation commenced with 5 separate tests, sending different individuals through the mirror with supplies, weapons, and a video camera connected by a length of cable back through the mirror. Since the disc is believed to change color based on an individual's regrets, or guilt, the first test subject is an expendable D class, convicted of murder, and with a history of attempted suicide. The D-Class fully cooperated with every step of the testing, and the disc changed into a hue of blue while held. After entering through a mirror, the subject passed into an empty lowland plain, but everything is tinged with a heavy blue color in the video feed, although the subject later states there is no odd coloring for him. Subject walks across the plain, devoid of landmarks, until he comes across a primitively dug hole. Subject is instructed to enter the hole, reluctantly doing so, climbing down with his hands 100 meters. As the D-Class reaches the bottom of the hole and continues to walk through a passage, he reaches a concrete enclosure and complains of a strong stench. Light fixtures dot the ceiling, and 7 doors line the enclosure. After trying a few doors and finding them stuck shut, one of them opens into an empty room with a substance coating the walls, resembling brown, burnt plastic. Subject manages to open another door with a broken key, finding the ceiling covered in the same substance, as well as a cot, a pillow, and a crate. Inside the crate seems to be food boxes, with the word cereal written on them, although the video footage shows the writing as obscured squiggles. Subject notices some articles hanging on a wall, but the writing is illegible, and most of them crumble at the slightest touch due to age. There's also a book present, and when the subject approaches it, a high-pitched screeching noise erupts from somewhere for a few seconds. After the noise ceases, subject is told to leave the room, and sees some sort of figure peeping through the door at the end of the hall before it closes. Subject continues exploring, finding a few more crumbling articles and cereal boxes, before being told to leave by control staff. Subject readily complies, complaining that the stench is getting worse, but as he begins his ascent up the tunnel, the cable attached to him suddenly tightens and starts to pull the D-Class up. As the subject reaches the top, he notices nothing has changed, and begins to walk back towards the mirror. The cable begins pulling away at a 90-degree angle, and the subject turns around to see 37 figures standing behind him, each lacking identifiable features, as well as the blue tinge. Subject panics, the cable continues to be pulled in odd ways, and the subject begins shooting at an unseen target. Subject is finally brought back through the mirror with a foul-smelling fluid on his clothes. Looking back through the mirror, personnel noted the presence of a massive humanoid creature, at least 50 times the size of a human but with no facial features, crawling along the ground. The second test, the green test, commences with a female D-Class who stole a vehicle and caused the deaths of 2 children during the escape. Subject is cooperative, the disc turns green, and subject enters into a farmland landscape tinged green. The fields are barren, but the subject approaches a nearby farmhouse, circling it and finding 2 children's bicycles, a girl's and a boy's, as well as boys' clothes arranged descending a set of stairs. Subject screams at control, thinking this is some sort of sick joke based on her history, but it seems that the disc might have some control over location based on the subject's past. Subject descends into the cellar, finding it largely abandoned and unremarkable, but begins to complain about a stench. She finds a hatch on the ground, with the smell being the worst around it, and she descends the hatch to find a concrete enclosure similar to the blue test, but in much better condition. In the enclosure, she finds more cereal boxes, 3 skeletons, and an empty revolver. Subject continues searching, finding newspaper articles, a book, clothing, toys resembling those from the 1950s, and an Ethernet jack covered in a fluid so repulsive that she refuses to take a sample. Subject sees a figure at the top of the ladder as she begins to climb out, but it quickly disappears. She immediately vomits upon reaching the top of the ladder, and reports hearing a noise that Control does not. After stepping out of the cellar, she sees 2 of the massive humanoids crawling in the distance, noting that their arms seem to shrink and grow at different times. 10 minutes later, the humanoids disappear out of sight, and subject is instructed to enter the farmhouse. Dust coats the kitchen, food is spoiled, and the entire decor seems to strongly resemble that of the 1950s, although the subject locates a laptop. The laptop reveals the final shutdown moments of an operating system titled Faithful OS. Continued searching finds a children's bedroom, and when subject looks out a window, she sees a city in the distance, and the video footage shows roughly 300 figures standing around the house, although subject reports seeing none of them. Subject is told to return to the mirror, which she does, but a loud groaning noise and vibration is present for both subject and control staff as subject comes back through the mirror. The Violet test involved a young male convicted of murdering a police officer during a drug bust, utilizing excessive violence. Subject was uncooperative with the tests, but entered through the mirror into an urban cityscape with a violet tinge. The city seems to be largely empty, but there are a few cars that look to be futuristic and streamlined. Most of the cars seem to emit a powerful stench, and inspection reveals their interiors are filled with a large amount of a strange brown substance. Finally, the subject finds a car that seems to be newer than the others, and is empty, so he enters the vehicle. The dashboard of the car shows no steering wheel, ignition, or other controls, only a few blank screens, implying the car is possibly autonomous. Later review of the video footage shows a humanoid figure looking into the car from outside, but subject doesn't notice it, and Control decides to send in a professional team of armed escorts to assist in the exploration. The team enters the nearest building, titled XEA Research Partners Inc., and finds a typical corporate lobby, with a computer at the receptionist desk waiting for a login for Faithful OS. Much of the technology seen in the building seems to be advanced, and the team takes an elevator to the 114th floor, noting that 13 and 113 are missing from the keypad. The team gets a view of the city from the top floor, seeing that it is silent and devoid of activity, but a number of buildings have a strange brown growth attached to them. A view of the expressway sees one of the large humanoid creatures crawling along it, but the team heads back in the elevator, where they find that the button for the 74th floor has already been activated. They agree to go to this floor, finding another reception area, with a sign-in sheet bearing the year 1953. A logged-in computer contains text files related to appointment information, and the team finds a notepad belonging to someone named Dr. Boriziski, Blessed Purificationist. The team continues to search the floor, and finds a number of large containment capsules, some of them broken and leaking a brownish material, and others intact and holding nude humans with breathing masks. Charts for these patients contain conditions, but rather than physical ailments, the charts list personality flaws or incidents that occurred with them, such as infidelity. One chart discusses that the patient was submitted to a 3-day period in the Lord's Tears to cleanse her system, and another prescribes a week in the Lord's Tears to give peace of self. Suddenly, the D-class subject begins to panic and yell at the humanoid entities that are now surrounding him, visible on the video feed, but the escort team sees nothing. Entities continue to stare at the subject as one of the escort members grabs him, and the group returns to the ground floor. After leaving the building, one of the large creatures on the expressway notices the group, letting out a bellowing roar, and begins to rapidly move towards them. All but one of the team manage to make it back through the mirror, and when they attempt to head back into the mirror a short while later, they report a horrific smell. Upon going through, they find the uniform and possessions of the lost team member, but not the body. A review of the footage shows lost team member firing his weapon at the creature, which seems to be dripping a brown liquid, before being presumably eaten or absorbed by the creature. It became clear after analyzing recovered newspaper articles that something terrible occurred in this parallel world, and the Foundation became interested on whether or not any precautionary measures needed to be taken to prevent similar circumstances in our world. Because of this, rather than sending a D-class for another test, a doctor volunteered to go through for the yellow test. The doctor was cleared of any psychological issues and had no history of criminal activity. After stepping through into a yellow-tinged office environment, the doctor decided to forego the pulley return system. The office contains a number of computers, all running Faithful OS, and the Doctor also finds many filing folders, some of them bearing a symbol of praying hands. Entering the elevator, the Doctor notes he is on the 34th floor, and the elevator keypad lists the floors as -115 to 115, with no floors missing like the other building. He descends to floor -115, and during the lengthy descent, the camera glitches and reveals 14 other figures in the elevator with him. Another glitch shortly after reveals the Doctor alone in the elevator, and he remarks on a rising stench from below. The Doctor stops on the -110th floor, where he finds an observation deck from which he can access a few camera systems. He sees thousands of broken capsule containers, as well as one of the huge creatures on the ground floor, estimated to be 6 stories tall. A document on the PC directs the Doctor to a safe on the 54th floor, which he opens to find a notebook and a strange revolver. The Doctor returns to finish the test, but also notices the same text document on another computer, realizing that someone had spread a virus to put the document on every PC. This finally leads us to the red test, as SCP-093 was passed around the Foundation until it changed to a different color, which ultimately was with a service technician. The disc takes on a bright red color, and he enters into an obscured environment with no tinge of color. The technician is in a room with a rotating cylinder in the middle, and the walls are lined with countless copies of objects identical to SCP-093. The rotating cylinder is filled with holes, and occasionally beams of light will emit from the cylinder and connect with the discs on the walls. Some spaces on the walls indicate that certain discs are missing, and the technician turns around to reveal that the disc behind him is also missing, presumably as it's the one the technician is holding. The technician descends a ladder into a clean room filled with antiquated computer equipment and a monitor displaying a flashing interval of the words clean and unclean in different colors. The technician also sees a number of container tubes filled with a blue liquid and finds a number of documents on one of the computers. A length of time later, Control loses contact with the subject as the mirror returns to normal for almost 2 minutes before re-establishing itself. The technician returns through the mirror and undergoes sudden convulsions during his debriefing, displaying enhanced strength and killing one of the debriefing staff. It takes a heavily armed team with automatic weapons to take him down, noting that the subject did not bleed when shot, but instead leaked a greenish-brownish substance. Lastly, this brings us to the file on the recovered documents from the various tests, which slowly bring together a number of clues. To summarize, this world is focused on the United Lands of the Sun, a highly religious yet also hypocritical country led by a number of High Fathers, principally the Most Holy Father. Living pure, sin-free lives is priority 1 for most people living in the land, and those that are deemed sinful are sent to facilities where they are contained in capsules with a mixture of substances, most notably one called His Holy Tears, or the Lord's Tears. Subjects were contained for various reasons, such as disobedience, wanton lust, or anything else the High Fathers deemed sinful. More concerning, however, is the presence of creatures known as the unclean, the large half-creatures crawling across the countryside. The unclean seem to have a strange relationship with space and time, and absorb anyone they come across. The unclean spread across the land, consuming and wiping out cities, as the areas known as the unfertile zones continued to grow. Areas outside of the biggest cities became desolate, until eventually the largest cities fell as well, leaving the country quiet and empty. It's the final document recovered from the red test, however, that tells the full story. The document, written by a Foundation agent from another universe, explains that 350 years ago, this world experienced the arrival of an eldritch, godlike creature, known to the people as He. This creature declared that this world was unclean, and that the only way to save it was to purge it of sinners. He bestowed upon the world a number of vast technological advancements, and said in 10 years' time there would be a war to decide who is clean and who is not. The eldritch creature disappeared, and eventually the war commenced, instigated by the Holy Union of Land, known in our world as the United States. The most notable invention created for the war was the Holy Tears substance, which was said to purge the sins from the unclean. What it actually did, however, at least the purest concentration of the tears, is some sort of genetic restructuring, turning people into the massive creatures. These creatures were attracted to pure concentrations of the tears, and so they were drawn to certain areas, known as the unfertile lands, on purpose in order to contain them. It would seem that these humanoids become servants of the eldritch creature, meant to absorb anything deemed unclean. Those that are absorbed become the faceless humanoids visible only through cameras. These individuals become eternal spirits, never to truly depart from this desolate world, and they only wish to kill the eldritch creature to end their suffering. Somehow the creature uses the discs to travel between universes, spreading lies and conquering worlds, but the Foundation agent managed to trap it in this universe by destroying his disc and spreading the fragments through other worlds. So that's it. SCP-093 is one of a countless number of transportation devices that a godlike creature uses to travel between universes in order to conquer and destroy worlds. The people in the world the Foundation visited believed his words, accepted his technology, and eventually wiped themselves out, with most of them living an eternal existence of regret. SCP-093 is a lengthy tale, but it's one of my personal favorites, as it continually builds on the mystery of this desolate world, and you're inclined to continue reading to see if the pieces all fall into place. Like many skips, 093 does contain a powerful entity from outside of space and time, but more importantly, it is about the tragic tale of a civilization and their regrets. Insect Hell. 3 years. The presence of SCP-2111. If you can read this. Memetics in the SCP universe deals with anomalies that actively spread themselves across human consciousness and can alter the way a person thinks. These generally come in the form of cognitohazards, something that is hazardous when it is sensed, which can then alter your thinking or even kill you. Anti-memetics, on the other hand, are anomalies that make you unable to remember something, with the prime example being SCP-055, an object that anybody can perceive normally, but no one can remember it once they've left its presence. This is countered by regularly taking special drugs, called nestics, that force you to remember things. I've explained these concepts before, such as in my video on anti-memetics, but as this SCP concerns them, I figured it best to refresh things. SCP-2111 gets rather metaphysical, so try and bear with me. The document for 2111 contains a number of different articles, starting with one titled Red Talisman. This file tells us that this document and all associated documents are for the Foundation's Memetics Department only, and if you're reading it, that means you've gone through Phase 3 counter-memetic training. If, for some reason, you can read it and you haven't, that means you've been infected with a memetic kill agent and are likely going to die within 37 minutes. Moving on, though, we're informed that SCP-2111 is an algorithm capable of generating an infinite number of lethal cognitohazards.
This algorithm was created by the Foundation by analyzing a number of cognitohazardous anomalies for the purpose of weaponization, as well as behavioral modification. Red Talisman is the software created that transforms the raw output from the algorithm into weaponized media. These media can take the form of direct visual or auditory cognitohazards, but can also insert the material into memetic carriers. The document admits that the Foundation isn't really sure themselves how they got this to work, with only theories about the mathematics involved in the algorithm. The second document is titled Written Tongue, and unlike the first, we're told that this document is for the Foundation's Anti-Memetics Division, a group devoted to studying anomalies that are the opposite of memes, things that prevent people from spreading them. Here we're told that SCP-2111 is in fact a phenomenon in which the Foundation database spontaneously generates files containing both lethal cognitohazards and anti-memetic content. The Containment Procedures mention that the Foundation purposefully tells the Memetics Department that they have this phenomenon under control as an algorithm created by them. Written Tongue is a piece of software that skims these files for material that the Foundation can use, sanitizes them for threats, and then feeds it into the Red Talisman software. According to this, then, they're still interested in weaponizing these cognitohazards, they just really have no idea where the material is coming from. Additionally, some of the files will occasionally and unpredictably be deleted from the database. The first of these files appeared on the database in 1981, although it was heavily encrypted and protected with an anti-memetic trigger. Within 3 hours before the Foundation could decrypt it, it was replaced with a file containing both lethal cognitohazards and anti-memetic content, a dangerous combination. A secondary phenomenon linked to 2111 causes graffiti to appear spontaneously in Foundation facilities. This graffiti is painted using mundane materials from the nearby areas, but are constructed using Type 4 anti-memetic triggers, meaning that a normal person can't perceive them unless they've been specially conditioned and using special drugs. 73% of these messages are some sort of command to read the SCP-2111 document, while the rest contains a variable message. One message in a cafeteria written with chocolate pudding read, "Can anybody even read this?" Another in a researcher's office following his suicide and written using blood and brain tissue read, "Forget us." Other messages include, "Let me go," "Why can't you forget about me?" and "Mission accomplished." One of these, located in 058's office, contained an anti-memetic trigger capable of inflicting severe retrograde amnesia, and another, located in the anti-memetics headquarters, contained a cognitohazard that resulted in 7 deaths. A message left in 2015 in the office of the head of the anti-memetics division read, "Why has 058 stopped taking his medicine?" alluding to an incident in which 058 stopped taking his Nestic pills, resulting in him being susceptible to anti-memes. Something related to this phenomenon is both killing members of the anti-memetics division, but also warning them about the threats of anti-memes. Moving on, the third document is titled Revenant Theory, and is marked as being for the counter-conceptual division eyes only. Again, we're notified that if we haven't received the proper conditioning and authorization, we won't live to remember reading it. This file tells us that SCP-2111 is instead a hostile anti-memetic entity that specifically targets personnel under the effects of long-term Nestic drug treatment. In other words, those in the Foundation that regularly take drugs to counter the effects of anti-memes, allowing them to consistently remember things. This entity causes victims to suffer significant long-term retrograde amnesia, losing between 3 months and 21 years of memory. Additionally, due to this memory loss, victims are unable to describe the entity or the attack itself, although immediately treating the victim with amnestic drugs has been shown to halt the attacks. This is a pretty big problem, as anti-memes themselves are a worrying issue in the Foundation, and most of the top brass, as well as a number of researchers, are regularly taking these nestics. Wiping out years and years of memories for one of the O5s is not great, and it's noted that SCP-2111 is currently uncontained. The first known victim of 2111 was a Dr. Victoria Taylor, a researcher in the Counterconceptual Division. Taylor's memories were regressed to a point shortly after being recruited by the division in 1974, and her last known work before being attacked was on an object originally classified as SCP-2111. After publishing the report on the object in 1981, all of her work on the project was corrupted by unknown means and replaced with lethal cognitohazards and anti-memetic content. Those that read from the file before it became corrupted described it as preliminary research into an anti-memetic infovore of a previously unknown type. In other words, something that eats memories. This is the previously mentioned file that the Foundation claimed was encrypted, but really they just didn't want to share this info with the anti-memetics department. SCP-2111 targets individuals directly, but is also responsible for leaving the graffiti messages on walls, which sometimes contain hazardous material. Since these messages contain anti-memetic camouflage, they are only visible to individuals that are taking nestic drugs, which are the entity's intended victims. So far, at least 36 Counterconceptual Division personnel have been attacked by 2111, with the last one in 1994. The camouflaged graffiti is still making an appearance, but no longer contains any dangerous effects, so the Foundation isn't even sure if 2111 is still active. 3 months after the initial incident with Dr. Taylor, the Memetics Department claimed the 2111 directory in the database and began using it for their Red Talisman project to weaponize cognitohazards. The Counterconceptual Division has been looking into a possible connection between 2111 and the Memetics Department and have created a contingency plan called Revenant Theory, in case it's determined that the Memetics Department is compromised. Revenant Theory will insert a memetic agent into the Red Talisman software that will enhance users' loyalty to the Foundation and their personal guilt, which will likely trigger a witch hunt within the department. We have one last file, this one titled Read This. Upon opening it, we're greeted with text telling us that if we can read this, we're already dead. We're then given a message from the operations director of MTF Omega Zero, Amos Sanchez, who says that they're the most clandestine unit within the Foundation. He says that the reason we've been able to access all of these documents and why none of these cognitohazards are afflicting us is because the veils of the mortal world have been lifted from our eyes. In simpler terms, we died in the line of duty. Amos doesn't really know what we, and by extension MTF Omega Zero, are, with the Memetics Department believing that we are infomorphic entities in the new sphere, while the parapsychologists think that we are spiritual apparitions. Either way, we died, and we're not moving on for whatever reason. This affords MTF Omega Zero some unique capabilities compared to the rest of the Foundation. They can perceive memetic and anti-memetic threats that the living can't, and occasionally they can do something about them, which is the team's main priority. They can manifest anywhere there's a terminal connected to the Foundation database, and they can leave messages inside the database, although it's typically anti-memetic and cognitohazardous. The Memetics Department uses this material to create their weaponized hazards, although they don't know where it's coming from. The team can also write on the walls by staring at camera feeds and being really emotionally invested in the message. They don't know why this works, and they use it pretty sparingly, basically only to warn the Anti-Memetics Division about things, as well as direct those that have recently died to this file. Amos also says that the Foundation actually has 2 anti-memetic divisions working in secret, with everyone else, including each other, unaware of their existence. Since these divisions are really the only ones that can perceive what the MTF is doing, it's best to be careful around them. Additionally, Amos says that while you probably can go see what SCP-055 is now, it's best that you don't, as everyone who has tried has never returned. Finally, Amos says that sometimes members of this MTF go bad, and he wants to warn us what will happen if we do. With that, we're given a final version of the SCP-2111 documentation, with the object class of neutralized. It says that SCP-2111 was Foundation Agent Michelle Yu, killed in the line of duty in 1980. She essentially came back as a ghost and began haunting, or more accurately, attacking other Foundation personnel. Dr. Taylor eventually published her preliminary report about these attacks, after which Agent Yu, as the ghost, manipulated the file on the database, which seemed to trigger the ongoing manifestation of other entities identifying as deceased personnel on the database. In other words, this triggered the creation of MTF Omega-0, as agents that had died in the past and present were now being trapped in some way, focused around the SCP database. The report that Agent Yu modified now read as a plea from her that people should forget about her. She begs for people to let her go, forget about Michelle Yu, and that it isn't right that she's kept here like this. She then says that she was a fighter. She wouldn't let anybody get away with anything she could do something about, and she's angry. Basically, she believed that she was trapped this way because people hadn't forgotten about her, so she began attacking people's memories to forcefully make them forget about her. More specifically, she believed that people couldn't forget about her due to their long-term treatment with nestic drugs, which make people unable to forget things. Thus, she targeted people in the anti-memetics and counter-conceptual divisions that had known her while she was alive. It's unknown what exactly caused Michelle Yu to become trapped like this, but whatever she did with the file caused certain others that died to also become trapped. As they did, she became something of a leader, teaching them how to attack the living in the hopes that eventually they could wipe out enough memories to free themselves. Many of the ones that they killed had experience in memetic and anti-memetic warfare, so eventually several of them formed a new MTF to combat this alternative faction that was harming Foundation personnel. This new ghost MTF, Omega-0, theorized that you would not be immune to attacks from similar entities, so they created a new tool capable of editing or outright deleting these informational ghosts, called Identity Warfare Training. In 1994, the time of the last known 2111 attack, MTF Omega-0 successfully deleted the agent from existence. All of her followers either surrendered or were also deleted. Those that did surrender were edited in such a way as to make them think that they've always been a part of the MTF. The final addendum tells us that we've been officially accepted into MTF Omega-0, and we should begin training immediately in Identity Warfare Training so that we can begin combating informational entities. By doing this, they continue to serve the Foundation, even in death. So, what is SCP-2111? There's a lot of obfuscation going on here, with different departments within the Foundation having access to different levels of information. But 2111 itself was an agent that became trapped as a ghost after dying. She believes, and is probably right, that the widespread usage of nestics within 2 of the departments in the Foundation causes people to be quite literally unable to forget things. Ghosts pass on from the world when they are forgotten about. So with people unable to forget about the agent, she was trapped. She began attacking these people, either by destroying their memories or outright killing them in order to make them forget, so she could move on. When a researcher published a report about her, the agent interacted with the Foundation database, editing the file. This action caused others who died to also manifest as ghosts, and the agent taught them how to attack the living, all in the desperate hope of wiping out enough memories to allow them to move on. Eventually, though, some agents died and realized that, dead or not, there were anomalous entities actively harming the Foundation, and if they could do something about this, they would. They formed a separate ghost faction from the ones that were attacking personnel, and used their unique capabilities to wipe out the original agent. Since these ghosts are essentially just piles of information, they can be deleted or edited like a file on a computer. Those that surrendered to the MTF were edited to make them loyal to the MTF, and now the MTF exists to continue to aid the Foundation in a unique way, being able to perceive any anti-memetic or memetic threat. They can also leave messages to the anti-memetic division and the counter-conceptual division to try and warn them about certain threats. Anytime you bring in the term anti-memetics, it's going to get a little complicated, but I hope I've made this one fairly clear. The memetics department has no idea this MTF exists, instead believing that they created some sort of algorithm that they can use to create cognitohazards, when really they're just harvesting messages on the database from the MTF. They can't perceive the messages themselves due to lack of nestic training, so they just weaponize the raw material. The Anti-Memetics Division can read the messages from the MTF, but aren't really aware of them, although they have acted on the messages to prevent some threats. Ultimately, the MTF exists and continues to operate because some Foundation agents are really committed to the Foundation's goals, even if no one is directing them. I guess, if you can read this, you're already dead, so get to work.
SCP-5545 Abnormality. Throughout this series, we've seen things contained in a myriad of ways, including extensive containment cells, complicated rituals, anomalies contained inside of other anomalies, and things that don't even realize that they are being contained. In SCP-5545, we'll be looking at a rather unique containment scenario, although to say any more than that would give things away, so let's just dive in. First, looking at the containment procedures, we're told that a provisional site has been constructed around SCP-5545-1, with at least 18 individuals present there at all times. We're also informed that a conceptual site is there that contains SCP-5545-2 via association lock, meaning that the conceptual site doesn't actually exist as a physical location. All Foundation personnel entering the provisional site are told that SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site 344-2, the significance of which will become apparent later. Finally, SCP-5545-3 remains active as long as 1 and 2 remain contained. Moving on to the description to find out what all those things are, SCP-5545-1 appears as a series of hallways that manifest in the underground complex beneath Provisional Site 344-1. These hallways appear in various forms, but always lack doors or other discernible markings. They possess light fixtures at regular intervals, and are architecturally indistinguishable from their surroundings. More notably, these hallways extend indefinitely, and it's believed that they intersect with an extra-dimensional space. 5545-2, on the other hand, is an entity located within the conceptual site, although no other information about it can be provided at this point. 5545-3 occurs whenever the entity interacts with the hallways, during which 5545-1's area of effect will exponentially increase with time. Within 4 to 6 hours of the entity being in the hallways, these infinite hallways will begin to appear across the entire world. When the entity is not present, however, the area of effect will diminish, isolating it to the provisional site in Antarctica. This anomaly was first discovered, to the Foundation's knowledge, by colonial explorers in the late 1700s. These explorers had repeated interactions with the entity in the hallways, in some cases leading to the activation of the 5545-3 effect, resulting in a number of deaths, either from the anomaly itself or from suicidal tendencies provoked by it. The Foundation believes that the total number of deaths from this period were around 70. The Foundation itself discovered 5545 in September of 2003, during an expedition into Antarctica. They initially believed the extent of it to be simply some infinite hallways, but after discovering the conceptual site containing the entity, 16 research members died, leading to the current containment procedures. We know it's common procedure for the Foundation to throw some D-Class and some MTFs into things like this, and that's exactly what they did, but the results were less than satisfactory. Between December of 2003 and November of 2019, 70 D-Class personnel and 29 MTF units were sent into various infinite hallways, with none of them ever being seen again. On November 18, 2019, Site Director for the nearby Site 58, Jason Monroe, submitted a request to the O5 Council to launch a formal investigation of 5545, along with the extensive loss of human life and the general misconduct of staff at Site 344. In his request, Monroe states that the head researcher of 5545 has been in charge of the project for nearly 2 decades, and yet the documentation for 5545 has only been updated twice, in September and December of 2003. It's especially odd that 5545 is considered to be a safe class, since there's very little info provided for it, and it seems to be capable of spreading across the globe in certain situations. Since Provisional Site 344 has been silent for so long, Monroe believes that something drastic has occurred, and due to the proximity of his site to 344, it falls under his jurisdiction to investigate, and he plans to do so personally. The O5 Council unanimously approves his request, and he heads over to check it out. Arriving at the provisional site, Monroe comments on the relaxing helicopter ride over, a nice respite from the stress of being a site director. He was supplied with a concealed weapon, some audio recorders, and something referred to as a hostile meme detector, which I think we could all use sometimes. Monroe has past experience as an MTF agent, which is why he feels comfortable enough to carry out this exploration himself. At the provisional site, he's greeted by a researcher who tells him in an almost depressive tone that SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site 344-2. Monroe runs it through the hostile meme detector, but it comes up negative, so he continues in. He's given a small room to stay in, but since he arrived at night, he'll have to wait to meet with the head researcher, Dr. Reed. Monroe wakes up early the following morning to walk around the site, and notices at the end of each hallway is a sign that says that it's safe to cross. He muses that small things like that make containment possible in the Foundation. Since the anomaly makes infinite hallways, you would notice if there wasn't a sign right away. Despite this, though, this facility has still become compromised somehow. He's also noticed that there are cameras in practically every hallway, but none in his room or the halls outside of the dorms, which he plans to use to his advantage. Monroe meets with Dr. Reed for 30 minutes, but describes the meeting as lackluster. Reed is either sleep-deprived or incredibly bored, or as Monroe believes, both. Monroe asked him some questions, and Reed answered briefly and concisely, and when he questioned him about the entity, Reed stated that he couldn't say anything about it without it constituting a containment breach. Monroe learned nothing new from the interview and returned to his room. He had recorded the conversation and runs it through his meme detector, believing that Reed is certainly affected by something due to his vague and robotic responses. Despite this, though, the detector comes up completely negative. So whatever's going on here is either too powerful and subtle for the meme detector, or it's not a meme at all. Later that night, Monroe writes that every Foundation site has a few hidden panels, known only to a privileged few, that allow someone to gain access to the entire security system. Due to his high level of clearance, he accesses one of these panels and checks things out. He finds that there's a single camera feed coming from the conceptual site, which displays a completely black screen, and the words SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site 344-2. Turning on the audio feed for the camera produced a slight static noise, so Monroe kept it muted. He's not sure why this feed even exists, since only Dr. Reed can access it normally, and it doesn't show anything. Monroe also writes that he's noticed that every employee here spends their time at cubicles staring at their screens, most of which just display static. The only person that actively uses their computer is Dr. Reed, and Monroe hopes to find out exactly what he's been up to. He watches the cameras and notices that Reed makes routine trips out of his office to get a drink and go to the bathroom, so he plans on sneaking in during those times. Monroe also mentions that he encountered his first infinite hallway today, and if he wasn't paying attention, he probably would have just started walking down it. Monroe eventually waits for one of Dr. Reed's 15-minute breaks and sneaks into his office. Looking on his computer, he finds the 5545 documentation, but most of it is locked behind O5 clearance, so not even Monroe can see it. He looks through some other files, however, and finds two things. One is a photograph of what seems to be an MTF walking down a hallway, and another is an Excel spreadsheet containing a list of every employee who's ever worked at the site. Around half of the people listed are deceased, either from the anomaly or from suicide, but there is one single redacted entry. All of the info about the person's name, clearance, and even cause of death have been removed from the sheet. Monroe wanted to continue digging, but ran out of time, and left before Reed returned. He plans on figuring out how to get past the O5 clearance block, as he's bothered by both the fact that there's an O5 clearance block in the first place, and the fact that the council unanimously approved his investigation. Something is fishy, and he hopes to crack open the mystery. He later writes about a dream he had, in which he's standing in a lavish home he doesn't recognize, with crimson walls outlined with hellishly detailed golden adornments. There is a table made of glass surrounded by silver chairs, and he's shivering despite not feeling cold and wearing a large, thick coat. At the end of the room is a fireplace. A few minutes pass by as he walks through the room, looking at statues along the sides, all of their faces either masculine or feminine. The male faces are angry, and the female faces are afraid, and Monroe knows in the dream that the two are related, but he doesn't know how he knows this. At the end of the room, standing in front of the crackling fire, he hears the chandelier behind him softly swinging, but when he turns to look at it, he finds that the chandelier isn't swinging at all. He looks back to the fireplace to find that it's now infinitely tall, extending far beyond the abyss above him, and he realizes that the swinging sound is coming from within the fireplace. A shape emerges from the fire, and he doesn't recognize it until it has reached out and bored into his mind. The shape is that of a small girl's corpse, hanging by a horrendously long thread intertwining with the laces of the scarlet walls and extending upwards into the void. She grips the sides of the fireplace and pulls herself out, staring at Monroe in anger, but he doesn't know why. He feels that he is the source of all of her rage and fury, but she can't free herself from her torment. Monroe steps into the fireplace and the girl rips his skin off, exposing his muscle to the flames, and they burn together, forever. Monroe has actually had this dream numerous times previously, but this time, upon entering the fireplace, He blinked, and he was suddenly in a hallway. He's not sure why this dream was different or what it means. After writing about the dream, he tore up the page and threw it away before returning to bed. The following day, he simply wrote in his journal that he had a weird dream last night, but doesn't elaborate. His main priority right now is finding out how the O5 Council are involved with this anomaly, and also what exactly is happening here at this site. He mentions the conceptual site of 344, but doesn't know what exactly that entails or how he could access it. The containment procedures say that the entity is contained in the conceptual site through an association lock, which he assumes means that the entity has become associated with the concept of being contained, and that becomes its reality. He really has no idea, as he's never come across the idea of a conceptual site before. The entity seems to cause suicide in some individuals and directly kills others, but he doesn't know the criteria for either. The mystery redacted individual likely died in a different way than everyone else, but it could just be a red herring, as the Foundation does that sometimes. He plans on infiltrating Reed's office again in a couple hours. A day goes by before Monroe writes another journal entry, in which he states that he managed to sneak back into Reed's office and accessed his computer again. Monroe figured that Reed has some way to access the entire 5545 file, so there might be a way to do so simply from his computer. After some digging, he found the credentials in a hidden file in a non-conspicuous folder. They were clearly outdated and non-functional anywhere else, but since this system was isolated from the rest of the Foundation, he was able to access the full file. Here he learns that 70 D-Class and 30 MTF members had been lost to the anomaly, which he was not aware of before. More disturbingly, he finds all of his previously written notes stored in the file, including his discarded ones. He doubts that Reed is responsible for this, instead suspecting that the O5 Council is involved and monitoring him, although he's not sure how. While perusing the file, however, Dr. Reed returned. Dr. Reed asks him if he's aware that entering his office without permission is a breach of protocol, but Monroe confronts him about the large number of D-Class that he's thrown into the anomaly. Dr. Reed realizes that he's breached the file's security, but Monroe doesn't care anymore, as he strongly suspects that the anomaly is influencing them somehow. Reed, however, stays calm, and says that Monroe has violated the site's rules several times and has now gone against O5 protocol, so he may face termination charges. Monroe pulls out his concealed pistol, although Reed doesn't react to it. He says that the O5 Council sent him to ensure that the anomaly is being contained properly, and he believes that Reed has been inadequate in his position. Reed counters and says that Monroe's orders were given to him in order to assist in the anomaly's containment, and everything has gone perfectly so far. Monroe has no response to this, and Reed simply tells him that he should return to his room, as he has everything he needs. Monroe does so, pondering over and over what Reed told him and the entire mystery here, that they have access to his notes and that the O5 Council agreed to send him here. He later writes that he feels like he's going insane and that there's some sort of conspiracy going on here. For whatever reason, he hasn't been detained, terminated, or even recalled from his investigation yet, despite being caught red-handed. He's starting to suspect that he might be here for some reason other than simply investigating the anomaly, some sort of higher purpose like a puppet on a string. The fact that the 5545 documentation hasn't been updated since 2003, and yet they have all of his notes on file, especially perplexes him. He wonders how long he's been here, since repeated amnestic usage to wipe his memories over and over for that long would surely show some side effects. He's also perplexed by the fact that he volunteered to come here. It wasn't an order by the council, but they seem to have expected it nonetheless. He goes back to the phrase he's heard multiple times here. SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site 344-2. and he figures that he should try and access the conceptual site 344-2 somehow. He suspects that the infinite hallways are the entrance to the conceptual site somehow, but he can't prove it. If he goes into the hallway and he's not supposed to be there, Dr. Reed will be forced to prevent him from going. But if he is supposed to be there, then he hopes to find some answers. He decides that he'll likely be terminated regardless for breaking O5 orders, so he's got nothing left to lose. He takes a camera along with him, and we're given a log of his trek down an infinite hallway. He walks partway in, and turns the camera to show that there is now no entrance or exit visible, only darkness on each end. The flickering of the lights increases in pace as he continues to walk, and the sound of ventilation pipes grows. The pace of the flickering lights increases to an alarming rate, and Monroe begins to hyperventilate, stopping his walk before the lights suddenly turn off. 3 seconds pass in darkness before the lights come back on, but now the hallway has taken on a more ornamental appearance, with elaborate rugs and wooden decorations. Monroe is heard on the camera choking back a sob, and he frantically scans the hallway, drawing in a sharp breath, and he says that he's seen this before. He continues walking, although it's clear he's more agitated than before. 6 minutes go by until Monroe suddenly stops, zooming in his camera on the far end of the hallway where there is a faint, flickering light. He then continues to walk towards it, stopping again 5 meters from a doorway that leads into a long room. At the far end of the room, the flickering light changes shape wildly and is occasionally obscured by a moving figure, although the camera doesn't show many details. As the footage focuses, the light is revealed to be coming from a fireplace, and Monroe takes a deep breath and steps into the room, revealed to be Conceptual Site 344-2. The room is large and poorly lit, the walls extending upwards infinitely, and statues line the sides featuring male and female faces. Monroe makes various noises indicating his immense emotional distress, but he continues towards the fireplace. He sees a single white thread hanging in front of the fireplace, and says, "Oh God, no," out loud. He stands there motionless for 1 minute, breathing shallowly until a faint creaking sound starts to escalate in volume. Monroe becomes more distressed as the white string begins to swing back and forth. His breathing quickens before he draws a deep breath and turns around, letting loose a scream. The camera footage shows over 100 identical corpses with Monroe's appearance, each hanging from a multitude of white threads. All are dressed differently, however, with some wearing farming garments or D-class jumpsuits or MTF tactical gear. In the center of the room, at ground level, the corpse of a young teenage girl is also hanging by threads, although her body is perfectly preserved. She is dressed in 18th century clothing, and unlike the other corpses that are lightly swinging, she is entirely motionless. Monroe says that he remembers, and begins sobbing uncontrollably as he drops the camera. He asks, "How much longer will you do this?" But there's no audible response, as the corpses quickly rise out of the camera's view. A single string lowers itself in front of Monroe as the room reduces in size, the infinite hallway visible behind the corpse of the motionless girl. Monroe says that he gets it, and that you want him to make a choice. If he leaves here, the entity will follow him outside, but he'll be free. This will cause the infinite hallways to spread all over the world, resulting in thousands of other people dying instead of him. If instead Monroe chooses to die here, he'll be brought back again and again with a different life each time. He'll be killed over and over forever, but only he will die for his sins. He says that he's sorry, and 3 minutes go by, during which Monroe composes himself and stops crying. He then says that the Foundation knew about this, and they needed him to come here in order to keep the entity contained. They needed him to make the right choice. That's why this has happened before, and will happen again, and everything was set up
so that things would play out this way. They knew how this would play out because they've already read the script. Monroe eventually makes his decision and approaches the string near the fireplace, picking it up. It coils around his hand as the lights from the hallway behind the room turn off. The thread snakes through his clothing and around his skin, and Monroe looks at the girl's corpse, saying, "How could I ever forget you, Emily?" The thread tightens around him, and he spasms uncontrollably as he collapses to the floor. Finally, the light from the fireplace goes out, leaving only darkness. Lastly, one of the O5 members sends an email to Dr. Reed, responding to some of his questions and concerns. They say that technically everything in the mock SCP-5545 file is correct, as Site-344 is used as an information processing base when not containing 5545, so that's why 18 people are constantly employed there. The entity is technically contained via association lock, but it's not associated with the concept of being contained, but rather it's associated to 5545-4's death. This is the first mention of 5545-4, but we can infer that this is the designation for Monroe. The phrase SCP-5545-2 is contained in Site-344-2 that is repeated so often has nothing to do with actually containing the entity, but rather is meant for Monroe to hear and draw him in. Secondly, they deny Dr. Reed's request for an amnestic regimen, so he's forced to retain all of his memories from each cycle, in case anything goes wrong. Third, they found the next iteration of Monroe as a D-class transfer, and they estimate that it will take at least 6 months before they have to go through this process again. It seems that as soon as Monroe dies by sacrificing himself, he's immediately brought back to do it again, although he doesn't remember things until he arrives in the conceptual site. Finally, the O5 member says that they don't have answers to a number of Reed's questions. They don't know what Monroe did to this young girl 300 years ago and what resulted in this cycle. They don't know why her effect manifests as hallways specifically, or how she propagates her goal, or why the hallways extend across the world if Monroe refuses. They state that it's not their job to rescue Monroe from the consequences of his actions, and when they tried to prevent him from going to the conceptual site in 2005, it resulted in the hallways manifesting everywhere to try and force him to enter. They don't want to repeat this mistake, and they have no qualms about delivering him each time to the girl. It's not their job to research, and it's not their job to interfere, simply to secure, contain, and protect. So, a few hundred years ago, a man named Jason Monroe did something especially heinous to a young girl named Emily. As part of some anomaly, whether Emily herself was anomalous or had access to one, this created a loop. Emily is now contained in a conceptual site, and Monroe continues to reincarnate whenever he dies. Emily's goal is to bring Monroe to her conceptual site, and she accomplishes this through these infinite hallways that she has the power to manifest anywhere in the world. She's satisfied as long as Monroe ends up at the conceptual site to sacrifice himself, but if not, she'll make hallways appear across the world and cause the deaths of anyone who walks down them. The Foundation acquiesces to Emily by making sure they get a hold of Monroe and manufacture the scenario that leads him directly into a hallway at the provisional site in Antarctica. In a lot of ways, Emily has really won one over on the Foundation, as they are not usually happy complying with an anomaly's demands, but they'll continue to do so to prevent angering her. On the one hand, Monroe has a pretty rough situation, forced to sacrifice himself over and over for something he did hundreds of years ago. On the other hand, he is complicit in creating this anomaly, and he does have the choice of walking away and causing thousands of innocent deaths, but it seems he's a good enough person to make the right choice each time. Containment in the SCP universe often requires sacrifice of some kind, although it's usually not to this sort of personal degree. In some ways, it is a little cold of the Foundation to make no efforts to try and subdue Emily in some other way so that Monroe can break free of this cycle. But considering how often they throw away lives just in the pursuit of exploration or research, I can't say it's surprising. Monroe may regret his actions 300 years ago, but as they say, you can't escape your past.
SCP-5552, Our Stolen Theory. Time travel is one of the holy grails of science fiction, a concept largely foreign to our normal lives, but one that has interested and excited people for decades. While it's certainly possible that at some point in the distant future, humans will unravel the secrets of time travel, for now it's left strictly in the hands of fiction. Depictions of time travel range from the simple to the complex, and from utilitarian to horrific. Obviously, SCP-5552 is about time travel, and since many of the interesting stories in the SCP universe are about humans interacting with forces they don't completely understand, this should be pretty good. The article starts by informing us that the file is currently under review, as a database at a Foundation site in April of 2020 reported a series of unauthorized file creations and modifications. These files were specifically related to SCP-5552, and all past information on the SCP has been lost. What's more is that no personnel assigned to the 5552 project can remember if any anomaly had been previously assigned to the 5552 slot. Every existing file related to SCP-5552 now has an upload time of 1:43 p.m., which is the same time that Dr. Naman Gupta began his speech at the 6th International Conference on Physics, discussing bidirectional time travel. What we're going to be reading are the current files on the database that were created or modified at that time. First is an SCP document about SCP-5552-EX. EX is an identifier added onto the end of SCP numbers to signify that they have been explained by scientific knowledge available to the Foundation. 5552-EX is described as the Wendell Conduit, as explained in the bidirectional time travel paper written by Jonathan Wendell. I won't bother listing off the technobabble that explains the Wendell Conduit, but basically a Wendell Conduit acts like a wormhole, but requires far less energy to open and sustain. Dr. Wendell is working with the UN to create a time machine using this Wendell Conduit, and the GOC have blocked the Foundation from learning more. Of course, the Foundation has been at work on their own to create a time machine under the title of the Cronus Project, led by Dr. Naman Gupta and Dr. Cindy Helsman. We're given a transcript of a conversation between the two of them as they examine Dr. Wendell's paper. Gupta is disgusted as he feels that Wendell stole their research to publish this paper, claiming that half of the math in the paper is copied straight from their draft. It's clear that Gupta is rather jealous of Wendell, disgruntled that Wendell even named a new property of matter after his dog, while Gupta has nothing named after him. In the end, the two doctors conclude that nothing in the paper regarding time travel seems to be amiss, but they're determined to keep working. This changed the designation of 5552 to explained, as there didn't seem to be anything anomalous at work. Sometime later, Foundation satellites picked up a visual disturbance in Canada, as 20 acres of land had become entirely black in appearance, including all plants and animals in the area. Personnel were sent in to check it out, finding that the material in the area hadn't just turned black, but rather that no light was reflecting off of the surfaces. They were able to walk on the ground, but touching anything organic caused it to melt and fall apart. In the center of the area was a hole in the ground, about the size of a manhole, with a ladder built into the side of it. The personnel tie up a rope and climb down, finding a GOC facility, also entirely black. The facility was mostly empty, but they found one unlocked door labeled as the primary construction bay. The entrance to this room, however, was blocked by humanoid figures, motionless and also turned black. Rather than risking breaking them, they reached over with a camera to take some pictures of inside of the room. The interior was packed with more humans, all crowded around a capsule in the center, the only thing in the area to retain its original color. The personnel believed that the capsule was occupied, but couldn't say for sure. The Foundation began asking questions about this to the GOC, who admitted that this was the result of their efforts to create a time machine. Realizing that the endeavor was not worth the trouble, they handed over all of their documentation to the Foundation. Back with Hellsman and Gupta, they discussed the incident, as Hellsman was confident that their research and math was correct, and the time machine should have worked. Gupta, however, shows that Wendell was stupid, as he used rounded numbers in his calculations because he didn't have full access to their math. The two believe that with the proper mathematics, the experiment could still work. Over the course of the next 3 months, Project Cronus constructs a time machine. After completion, rather than consulting the ethics committee and other proper branches of the Foundation, Hellsman and Gupta run an unauthorized test of the machine. It's actually Gupta's idea to run the test, as he intends to go back in time and prevent Wendell from stealing their work. Hellsman is reluctant, as obviously there are ramifications to performing time travel, and to risk it for such a petty cause seems foolish. Gupta says that, while it's possible he could go back and do things that set off unpredictable chains of events, most things that occur have little effect on other events. Hellsman relents and doesn't stop him, as he says he's going back 8 months so that he can speed their research along and publish their paper for the physics conference before Wendell can steal it. As Gupta climbs into the machine and Hellsman activates the controls, she wishes him good luck, to which he replies that he won't need luck because he'll have as many tries as he needs. The next document is similar to the first, explaining SCP-5552-EX, but now instead of describing a Wendell conduit, it names it as a Gupta-Hellsman gate, which was explained in a paper written by the two and presented at the physics conference. In a conversation between the two, Hellsman expresses nervousness about the project, but Gupta brushes it off, as he obviously knows that the device will work, but hides the fact that he came from the future. The timeline for the completed construction of the machine moved along at an expedient pace, but when the time came for Hellsman to perform the safety checks, she failed to meet her deadlines. She got caught up in doing rechecks and recalculations, to which Gupta tried to tell her to just trust him. It seems that Gupta's sweeping display of confidence in the machine has caused Hellsman to feel self-doubt about her own capabilities, while in the original past, they were on equal footing. This leads Gupta to reveal that he knows the machine works because he's already used it to prevent their research from being stolen. In doing so, however, he basically stole Hellsman's work from her. In the original timeline, Hellsman had the satisfaction of putting in the proper work and seeing the results, whereas the current Hellsman didn't really get to do anything. Despite the original Hellsman being fine with Gupta's plan, the current one says that the original probably didn't know how this would feel. A few weeks later, the site holding the time machine experiences a couple major power outages, 20 minutes apart. Security footage prior to the first one showed Hellsman entering the time machine, but security personnel were unable to access the testing area before the second power outage occurred. When they finally did make it in, they found a black powdery substance around and inside the time machine. The control panel indicated recent activation, and a letter was found on the ground. In the letter, Hellsman tells Gupta that she knows how it must have felt to have his work stolen from him, and she understands why he did what he did, but she was robbed of her breakthrough moment entirely. She decided to go back in time in order to prevent Gupta from helping with her work, and then she's going to self-administer an amnestic so she can experience the feeling of solving the problems herself. She doesn't care if the research gets stolen, as long as it's their combined research. On the back of the letter is a series of handwritten calculations, with one number circled and the sentence, "Why do they always screw up the weight decay?" Gupta was seen sleeping in his office prior to the first outage, but could not be located afterwards. I hope you're still following everything, as we're just getting going now. The next document is another article detailing SCP-5552, but this time without the explained tag. 5552 is described as a theoretical method to travel back in time, although the Foundation lacks details about whether or not it's actually possible. The Cronus project was initiated in 2017 by Drs. Gupta and Talisman to look into the possibility of time travel, with Gupta coming up with two separate theories for time travel, both shot down by Talisman. It's believed that a time travel event occurred at a Foundation site after this point, but a lack of evidence led the investigation nowhere. After this, Gupta was promoted to site director and left the Cronus project, leaving Talisman as the project lead. Over the next year, Talisman comes up with a few different theories on how to achieve time travel, but all of them are abandoned for various reasons. In a conversation between the two, Gupta tries to be encouraging to Talisman so that she'll continue her research, otherwise she'll lose her funding, but Talisman is pretty much at the end of her rope. She's upset that Gupta left the project to go into management, to which Gupta responds that perhaps it's because he was the better researcher, and Talisman ends the conversation by cussing him out and slamming the door. Later that night, the area of the Foundation site containing Project Cronus experienced an incident similar to what the GOC experienced on their time machine. There were 3 casualties: one researcher, one janitor, and Dr. Talisman. On her phone was a voicemail from Gupta telling her that he's sorry about what he said, and he really left the project so that it could be Talisman's sole discovery. If she wanted, he would come back to the project. In the aftermath, Gupta took over the project. So at this point, we started with a Foundation-controlled, fully functioning time machine that worked based on principles named after a different doctor. Now, the Foundation has no time machine, and Dr. Talisman is dead. While this document doesn't end with a successful time travel event, the next document takes us back 2 years prior, describing SCP-5552 as a theoretical method of traveling between parallel universes, currently being researched by Drs. Gupta and Talisman. The theory was proposed by the two in a conversation in which Gupta claims to Talisman that he might be from the future. He says that he knows for certain he came from someplace where on April 16th, 2020, Talisman dies and he takes over the Cronus project. Well, it's possible that this means that he traveled back in time. It's also possible that he came from a different universe. He explains it similarly to time zones, in which in this universe it's currently April 4th, but in another universe it's March 6th, as different universes are temporally offset. Backwards time travel might be impossible, but maybe you can jump to a parallel universe that's further back in time. Talisman asks, reasonably so, why he thinks this is what happened instead of just time travel, to which Gupta explains that not all parallel universes are created equal, and many of them are unstable. At certain points in time, arbitrary groups of particles will just lose stability, going black and crumbling apart. The two begin to work on calculating if what Gupta says is true or not. 2 weeks later, however, Dr. Gupta is falling apart from stress, rarely leaving his office and often shouting the phrase, "It doesn't make sense." Talisman meets with him, expressing her concern, and Gupta says that there's so much he can't explain, like why he's only gone through similar parallel universes instead of one where the Earth didn't exist or something.
Talisman reluctantly tells him that she hasn't been able to get his parallel universe theory to work, specifically the part about particles losing stability and falling apart. Talisman says that they'll come up with another theory, and he should take a vacation, as they have plenty of time before she's supposed to die. Dr. Gupta does go on a vacation, but while doing so, a massive incident occurred at the Foundation site, similar to the others, leading to the death of Dr. Talisman and Gupta taking over the Cronus project. In the next document, SCP-5552 is redefined to be the measurement of how well the position, velocity, and rotation of a particle can be predicted given the state of the universe at the time of the Big Bang. Basically, the focus is now on the phenomenon in which particles in an area turn completely black and crumble when touched. This apparently occurs when temporal stability is disturbed, which is pretty obvious to us at this point, but it seems that it's becoming a bigger problem, a process that the Foundation is referring to as wilting. Gupta mentions that Talisman's entire neighborhood wilted, leading to 166 casualties, and the Foundation is trying to play it off as a fire. He says that this means he's in charge of the Cronus project again, but he doesn't want to rush things, as he's been repeatedly going back into the past to fix things, but this time he wants to confirm his theories first. 2 weeks later, he starts putting together some models and runs them by another doctor, Dr. Green. The following month, part of the site containing Project Cronus wilted, and the project was moved to another site, the same as previous instances, even giving Dr. Gupta the same office. He begins work on the time machine so he can finish it before this site wilts as well. A month goes by with no progress, however, as he can't figure it out without Dr. Talisman. More time passes, and he ponders why he hasn't wilted yet as well, as really he should wilt as soon as he activates the time machine, but he hasn't. He's not sure how Dr. Talisman ever figured this out, and he can't make sense of her notes. It seems to him like there's some art to this that he could never grasp, while she did so easily. Obviously, this is just an inverse of the reason that Talisman went back in time in the first place. Dr. Gupta finally comes to the realization that the reason he hasn't wilted yet is because the wilting is coming from him. He's the reason that the timeline is destabilized, which is again obvious. It's because of him that every time he goes back in time to try and save Dr. Talisman, she instead wilts. Of course, rather than accepting this inevitability, Dr. Gupta decides to go back in time again to try and have Dr. Talisman help him solve this destabilization problem. On to the next document. It's another version of the SCP-5552 document, but this time it's really just a personal note from Dr. Gupta. When he went back this time, everything had already wilted at the Foundation site. The guards posted out front let him in to get his stuff, and he learns that the Cronus project made faster progress in this timeline, and had already finished the time machine. Since there's still some food here and the power is still on, he decides to stay and work on his theory so he can fix everything. The progress doesn't go well, and he learns that other parts of the world are spontaneously wilting as well, including parts of France, Thailand, and K2. In time, his heirloom watch wilts, and Gupta gives up on his theory about the destabilization, leaving him back at square one. He decides to Google Jonathan Wendell on a whim, reading about his professional accomplishments before moving on to tidbits about his personal life. It turns out that Wendell never owned a dog, and Gupta wonders where he got the name for his scientific property from. The property was named Wilt, and Gupta realizes that he's been using the term wilting to describe the destabilization process. His theory is that this has all happened before, all of this spontaneous destabilization, and the two doctors realized that the only way to fix things was to go back and prevent time travel from being invented in the first place. They would purposefully let Wendell take all of their research without proper math. There would be an incident, and they'd give up. Or that could all be wrong, as maybe Wendell did have a dog in the original timeline, or maybe he just randomly came up with the name. Either way, Gupta can't prove any of it. At this point, Dr. Gupta is left with really nothing but despair, as he has no research left, and no Dr. Helsman to assist him. He can't even explain why he can continue to travel back in time reliably without falling apart. He's at the point where he wishes that time travel didn't exist at all, and decides that he has little else to lose. That leaves us with the current document about SCP-5552, which refers to the previous 6 documents which spontaneously appeared on the Foundation database. They all have been uploaded at the same time, estimated to be the moment when Dr. Naman Gupta began his talk at the physics conference about bidirectional temporal travel. None of the individuals mentioned in the documents were questioned about the files, to avoid any sort of messy time continuity issues, leading the investigation into their existence with little to go on. A couple of weeks later, an incident occurred in Canada, as the GOC attempted to carry out Dr. Gupta's research into time travel. This leads Dr. Green to reopen the investigation into SCP-5552, finally interviewing Dr. Helsman about the Cronus Project. She had been reassigned a couple weeks prior, leaving the project dead in the water. He asks her if the terms Wilt or Wendell Conduit mean anything to her, but they don't. He then asks her if she knows a Dr. Gupta, to which she replies that he's the lead author of the GOC paper about time travel, but she's never met him. She asks if he died in that incident, and then she begins to cry, but she can't explain why. Dr. Green, who has read the 6 documents, says that he has a theory about why she's crying, but it's not important, as not everything needs an explanation. That leaves the current timeline with no time travel whatsoever, as Dr. Gupta went back, took over the GOC project involving time travel, and purposefully died while messing up the math so that the Foundation would give up on the project. In theory, this would result in a total temporal correction, as none of the events we read about would have occurred due to time travel no longer existing. In reality, though, time travel is a fickle beast, and the ripple effects were still felt by Dr. Helsman as she cried for Gupta, despite not even knowing him in this timeline. In the end, Helsman really had it right, as Gupta shouldn't have gone back in time for so petty a reason as renaming some scientific principles after himself. While they originally had a successful time machine created through their combined efforts, they are left now with one of them dead and no time machine whatsoever. Perhaps ultimately, though, Dr. Gupta did the right thing, as time travel is a far too powerful and capricious capability, better left to the realm of science fiction. While there's a number of potential interpretations of exactly how things played out here, the lesson learned is the same of most time travel stories. Perhaps try and accept what you have, rather than risk losing it.
SCP-073 and SCP-001, a money ROM. SCP-1936, Daleport. Innocent bystanders getting caught up in nightmarish situations is practically the bread and butter of the horror genre, and the SCP universe is certainly no different. Cosmic horror and Lovecraftian horror are especially focused on the overall insignificance of humanity amidst an uncaring universe, and the tendency for certain foolish individuals to prod and poke what they really shouldn't. Daleport is indeed a story of humans meddling in forces beyond their understanding, but it also contains perhaps a light at the end of the tunnel. For a week and a half in 1997, a strange cloud of gas covered the New England town of Daleport, preventing the Foundation, or anyone else for that matter, from entering the town or observing anything occurring in the town. When the gas finally cleared, the town was irrevocably changed, and no survivors were located, although the remains of a large number of Daleport residents were found. Many of the buildings in the town were destroyed, and those that remained featured significant anomalous alterations. Some rooms grew smaller when they were entered, eventually preventing an occupant from moving, and a number of residents and Foundation agents are currently irretrievable from these rooms. Certain doors would lead to different locations at different times of day, and some corridors would lead to several different locations simultaneously. The largest cause of death determined from the remains of Daleport residents seems to be suicide, but many of the remains feature anomalous properties themselves. A smear of entrails and viscera was found capable of picking up radio signals from up to 6 miles away, and the subject was found with a small plant that gave out a small constant flame, presumably SCP-1612. A torso was discovered embedded in a wall, which is strange enough, but blood is also seen continually manifesting 15 centimeters above the torso. The body of a man was found with both eyes gouged out, and a steady stream of ashes pouring from his facial orifices. Several corpses were discovered lined up with a charred, circular hole in their foreheads. A female corpse is currently floating 57 meters above the ground. And at 7:42 p.m. every day, several floating torsos are seen simulating the motions of running for 3 minutes before fading away. So far, this is all, oddly perhaps, par for the course for an anomalous incident in a small town. This is the aftermath, however, and we want to learn more about what actually happened during that week and a half. Luckily, so did the Foundation, and so they had sent in a few expedition teams when the gas cloud first appeared, to ascertain what was going on. The first thing sent in was an unmanned drone, equipped with various sensors, sampling tools, and surveillance equipment, as well as several rats to see if the cloud affected living tissue in any way. The drone entered into the cloud, finding within it a vast, smooth, wasteland-like landscape. The air itself was composed of sulfur, nitrogen, and carbon oxides, but not at a high enough concentration to kill. The rats were seemingly unaffected by the journey. The drone continued 2 kilometers into the cloud, roughly a kilometer beyond where the town of Daleport should have ended. Unfortunately, at this point, communication with the drone began to degrade, despite the equipment being capable of going out to 70 kilometers, and so the drone was returned to base. As you'd expect for an SCP exploration, after the drone is finished, the Foundation sends in the D-Class. 2 D-Class were sent into the cloud, equipped with hazmat suits and sensors, riding a larger unmanned drone equipped with a more powerful radio transceiver. They were taken a kilometer into the cloud, at which point one of the D-Class was told to remove their hazmat suit, which they did, suffering no ill effects aside from a slight difficulty in breathing. They continued another couple kilometers across the wasteland, finding nothing, until communication began to degrade, at which point they returned. Well, so far pretty boring, but let's kick it up a notch. Despite finding absolutely nothing so far, the Foundation isn't convinced, and so they send in a mechanized infantry platoon equipped with light armored vehicles. Usually an MTF would be sent in at this point, but for whatever reason, the Foundation suspects that they'll need a bit more firepower. 3 kilometers into the cloud, things start to get more interesting. One of the vehicles reports an upwards incline ahead of them, a first in the otherwise flat landscape. Another vehicle, however, reports no incline, but then the first vehicle says that they are now heading down the incline, with no one remarking on the discrepancy. A third vehicle reports that the sky is filled with red and blue patterns that seem to be responsible for screwing up the radio. The next voice heard comes from an unknown source, and speaks in a classic Lovecraftian jumble of letters, undecipherable to the Foundation. Another unknown voice chimes in to note that the first voice said, "Amen. May that heretic burn in the pit." At this point, the platoon was no longer able to receive messages from the home base, but they could still transmit, apparently. Sounds of a firefight break out, along with wildly varying descriptions of the attacking force. 30 minutes later, a third unknown voice is heard on the radio. It uses a number of unknown words throughout its message, but I'll paraphrase. It says that it is the shivering mist covering the town of Daleport, and it says the Foundation's men have been attacked while traversing through it. It says that some of the men have died, but the rest are in safe hands. It also says that evil has been summoned to this town by some sort of heretical society, and it is managing to contain the worst of it, but the town will not be unaffected. A great battle will rage, with a victor ultimately decided, and it asks that the Foundation does not send any more soldiers in, as it cannot protect them. When the battle is over, it shall leave, and it hopes that we survive the process. Surprisingly, perhaps, the Foundation actually listened, and didn't send in any more manned expeditions into the cloud, although they did send in more drones. None of them were capable of locating the town of Daleport. So, we didn't end up actually learning much from the hands-on approach during the incident, so we'll just have to piece together what we can from the remnants. We're next given a few documents written by the town's inhabitants, presumably during the incident. One document recovered from a laptop reads, "Dear Diary, today Mr. Sticky's arm came out of the closet instead of the window. It was even longer than ever, but it was still smoky when I touched it, so my hand hurts. I told Mr. Sticky I didn't want any of his gross food today, and he got mad. He said it was vital to the incubation of the lava. I'm really hungry, so I ate the gross food even though it was green and squirmy. I don't like Mr. Sticky that much." Interesting. There was also a phrase found in multiple locations throughout the town, including stitched into the internal organs of several residents. The phrase reads, "I am sorry that I could not save you. Pangloss." Who is Pangloss, you might ask? Pangloss is arguably one of the most mysterious entities in the entire SCP universe, mentioned in only a handful of SCPs. His habit seems to be leaving notes at the location of various SCPs, giving the impression that he's perhaps a deity of some sorts, or at the very least a capable SCP himself. These notes are short and to the point, such as his note for SCP-1612, the plant with the burning flame, which reads, "Don't let the fire die." Outside of the SCP universe, Pangloss is known as a character in Voltaire's novella, Candide, in which he is a philosopher known for his relentless optimism, and for believing that our world is the best of all possible worlds. Pangloss in SCP seems to borrow concepts from Voltaire's character, as well as elements of the Greek Titan, Prometheus, who both created man and stole fire from the gods to give to humanity. These concepts are referenced in SCP-1612, as it's an ever-burning flame that's found across the planet in various locations where humanity got its start. We're getting off track, however, but the main point here is that Pangloss is some sort of mysterious entity that seems to care for humanity. Another document was recovered from a store, written by someone that was hiding from whatever was occurring in Daleport. They were running out of food, and they remarked that they heard screaming coming from outside, believing it to be their neighbor, but the screaming turned from human into something else. They also heard the local reverend walking past their window again, ranting about something, and they managed to get a glimpse of the reverend, commenting that he had too many spaces in him. They say that they have to get out of here, as they hear one of the big guys coming this way, along with the sound of drums, but their sentence is abruptly cut off. Their final line reads, "I am the voice, and the voice is me." More helpful is the video footage captured from security cameras and other devices during the event. A surveillance camera at a gas station captures an early incident, as a cashier hands a customer a plastic bag. A nearby window shatters, and an unknown organism enters, roughly the height of an adult human, but covered in tentacle-like appendages. The organism quickly decapitates the customer with a tentacle, and leaps over the counter on top of the cashier, as blood and viscera splatter on the nearby wall for 30 seconds. An elderly man wearing a bowler hat and waistcoat enters the gas station, but rather than a face, there is only a triangle branded into their skin. The camera footage begins distorting heavily, and the organism seems to be wary of the individual, but they engage each other. A mere touch from the individual seems to hurt the organism, and the footage ends with the individual throwing the organism through a wall as the ceiling begins to bulge downwards. A video recovered from a camera outside the library shows an out-of-control car crashing into a lamppost. The lamppost splits open, and a spectral entity, partially translucent, emerges from inside the post. The occupants of the crashed car open the doors and begin running down the street, slowly chased by the entity. After several minutes, in which the entity failed to catch up, it stops and releases a blue shockwave, which does reach the fleeing individuals, causing them to become transparent and fade away. A number of cameras captured an event in front of the Daleport Town Hall, which is shown to have sustained significant structural damage. The front doors of the town hall are missing, and in their place is a glowing circle. An entire convoy of vehicles, both civilian and Foundation owned, are speeding down the street towards the town hall, accompanied by humanoid robots carrying firearms of unknown make and manufacture. The civilians disembark the vehicles and run towards the glowing circle at the town hall entrance, urged on by both the Foundation agents and the robots. A 3-meter-tall triangular entity covered in technological items emerges from one of the Foundation vehicles and interacts with one of the items before undergoing a series of convulsions. During these convulsions, a dubstep remix of the song Embers by Owl City was heard faintly through the town hall's microphones, despite dubstep not being created for another year and Embers not being released for another 15 years. The civilians approach the glowing circle, but a fractal-shaped sheet of skin leaps from the roof of the town hall, causing the agents and the robots to open fire on it, to little effect. The skin wraps itself around a civilian's head, at which point the triangular organism rushes over and rips it off, followed by activating a flamethrower, apparently killing it. The civilians enter the glowing circle, disappearing, followed by the Foundation agents and the robots. The triangular entity burns the phrase, "Pangloss grants you sanctuary," into the stonework above the entrance before leaving. 94 civilians and almost all of the missing Foundation agents that had been sent into the cloud were found at the nearby Foundation facility in the weeks following the incident, each suffering from severe memory loss. I know what you might be thinking, that this is all just weirdness for weirdness' sake, but there is indeed a story here, and it comes from a number of documents connected to a local cult known as the Victory Society. The first note was found on the swollen corpse of James Curtis, a member of the Victory Society. It seems to be a list of things that the cult needs for an unknown purpose. Items include 2 trout, a bottle of milk, virginal blood that is to be mixed with the milk, assorted souls willingly sold, at least 200 beetles, lots of ice, 2 bodies that have been dead for at least a year, and some human eyes. More interesting, however, are the comments written in next to some of the items. The virginal blood mixed with the milk is for something referred to as he who walks beneath dreams, who is into that sort of thing, apparently. The alliteration related to assorted souls willingly sold is a big deal for that which waits inside the horizon. The writer remarks that if Hawshore, the name of the Reverend mentioned earlier with too many spaces in him, thinks that if he has to use the ice to make a sculpture for the Shivering Mist, he's got another thing coming. The human eyes are supposedly for the Blind One, who has thousands of sockets. Other cult members are gathering other items, while Hawshore just sits at home with his books. The next passage was written inside the cover of a charred book found outside the Daleport Church, and I'll take the time to read it in its entirety. The border of the mural is encompassed by Sylvester, the Shivering Mist that will descend upon the world during the time of awakening. The mist is all-encompassing, and shall act as a barrier to those wishing to stop the awakening, as well as confine the great trinity of potential victors. The three at the center of the mural are the Great Victor of Flames, the Great Victor of Frost, and the Great Victor of the Storm. They rain down destruction upon one another, with their true names inscribed in unreadable, unknowable runes. Around the three are visions of the great battle that contain the majority of those that shall come to this realm, with Diger, the dark god of lampposts, the Blind One illuminating the way for his followers, who leave tributes upon crooked light posts. Digelt manifests as the flies pouring out of the mouths of his beloved, and Bakurs to assist in the conflict any way he can, while Nini, the Trepanner, frees his followers from the skulls of their oppressors. The shredded cabbage of misfortune will destroy those who oppose the vegetable monarchy. Zin, herald of Marp, commands the army of Lepidoptera to carry those away who sleep with the flowers beneath the silver ash in the dream attics of Inanimatum. The voice of ages, though not visible, is omnipresent, represented by the yellow runes bearing his name hidden throughout the mural. Finally, at the bottom, the minor minions and deities pledge their allegiance to the three victors. Those who pledge their allegiance to the Great Victor of Flames are tinted orange, the Great Victor of Frost, violet, and the Great Victor of Storms, green. Many, such as he who walks beneath dreams, his face a mere triangle, remain unaligned and are painted in black, for they are opposed to none, and yet opposed to all. The dark deer, Demax, is shown around the edges, forever excluded by the rest. Sheogorath remains, ruling his kingdom of two faces, before he himself brings its downfall, only to be stopped by a great prisoner of the Dragon King. 20 goats stuck together making a goat ball, spin around and around all the way to goat hell. The skeletons forever fight their final war. The conflicts of these minor deities will have little impact on who the great victor of this battle shall be. We're given a description of a great mural that depicts a massive battle between a number of deities and deific figures, ultimately with one victor among three main contenders, supported by a number of lesser deities. Yes, that is indeed a mention of the Daedric Prince Sheogorath from the Elder Scrolls series of video games, which raises more questions than it answers. Many deities are apparently unaligned in this great battle, notably he who walks beneath dreams, whose face is a mere triangle. That at least answers a question for us. Pangloss, however, is not mentioned, at least not by that name. The cult of the Victory Society was gathering materials for some or all of these entities, but their reasons for doing so are so far unknown. We're then given a series of journal pages found on the anomalous corpse of Reverend Michael Hawshore, the leader of the Victory Society. In the first page, Hawshore says that he's returning to Daleport, and mentions someone named Godfrey who wished him luck as he left,
but was hoping for Hawshore's failure. Hawshore says that he took all of the necessary books from the library, and also mentioned finding a proper way, alluding to the Wanderer's Library. One of the tomes apparently gives off enough heat to burn Hawshore's hand, but he says you can't expect to do something like this without making some minor sacrifices. He finishes by remarking that it's disheartening that there aren't more respectable people interested in this venture, and he's worried about the next time. Written a week and a half later, the second page discusses a priming ritual for the One of Broken Nines, which required blood sacrifice, apparently of a child. Hawshore had hoped that the child could be anesthetized, but it was not allowed, leaving him a little shaken up. The child is dead, but he says the child would thank him if it knew why he was doing this. He repeats the phrase, "It's for the good of everybody," and ends by saying that the victor will walk from the rubbles of man and restore clarity to those who remain. The third page was written 12 days later, and Hawshore explains that the Voice of Ages required the blood of a heretic, not specifying any religion. Hawshore had possessed doubts about the devotion of James Curtis to the cause, and so he used his blood. James's blood worked, proving Hawshore correct, adding that James's selfishness would have doomed them all. Hawshore remarks that his time is coming to an end, but he will welcome his death, even if it is not quick. He ends by writing that the world will lie still again on Monday, and it will thank them for it. A transcript of a speech given by Hawshore to members of the Victory Society was also found. Again, for the sake of preserving the narrative importance, I'll read it in its entirety. Brothers and sisters, we come together for the last time today. It has been an honor to work with you all. I could not have hoped for a better group with which to secure the future of mankind. From the dawn of time, terrible impossibilities have spawned from the darkness between stars, not hating life, simply being indifferent to it. We are as ants to these abominations, these demented gods. I use this term as this is what they are called in older texts. You will not find any biblical god here, or perhaps you will, I do not know. The use of gods here is this specific form of creature, born from the primordial chaos of this reality, not just a powerful being. Simply powerful beings do not reach the uncaring depths of cruelty and depravity that the gods do. They are so far above us that we are but insects. Accordingly, we shall look as such. In order to gain the forgiveness and favor of the gods, we must learn to know our place before them. Each of these things seeks dominion over the laws of reality itself, imposing the nature of their twisted existences upon stars and planets and people. The only answer to this threat: these gods must be destroyed, the slate wiped clean. We could not do this, by no means, no. But we cannot allow these things to exist. A kingdom cannot have 1 billion kings. We cannot kill the gods, no. Only a god can kill a god. We will bring them here and bind them until their bloodlust is sated, until all but one is dead. Always a single god remains, the victor, who returns to whence they came as the only god remaining. But their primordial chaos eventually spawns more gods, more twisted angels and demons, and so it all comes to pass again. Our vigilance must be constant, for a new victor must be found again and again. We will leave a mark in creation, but it will fade, it will heal. Stand strong as our people have before. Stand strong as the near men in ancient cities did. Stand strong as we did at the gates of Sodom. Stand strong as we have always stood strong,
because this must always be done. Fortune favors those who take bold steps. We shall become unified with Inanimatum, entering the Somnium Eternum. May we be forgiven. This is a pretty self-explanatory summary, as Hawshore lays it all out on the table. There are a lot of elements of cosmic horror present here, but the twist is that rather than the cultists worshipping the ancient godly entities, they intend to summon them all into one big battle royale, with one winner. Since these gods are a negative influence on reality, they apparently need to be purged once in a while to keep our existence safe. Hawshore claims that the Victory Society has been responsible for doing this multiple times in the past, and will continue to do so in the future. The gaseous cloud is placed over the site of this war in order to both prevent outside interference, as well as protect the rest of our world. A section of writing was found in the back cover of Hawshore's journal, likely his last remarks. His sanity seems to be slipping away, and his body is already being anomalously affected, as his throat goes somewhere else, but he doesn't like where it goes. He says the war going on here is filled with cold, sideways fire. The rest of it is mostly gibberish, involving his hands made of wire and cyanide, and how they must eat babies to quell the Titans. The final entry in the article is a transcript of a video that recorded part of the event from near the church. A large entity composed of stone, soil, and some type of fungus appears above the church, and the camera begins shaking as a sound akin to a distorted whale song is heard. A second entity then appears above the church with a crystalline structure and a bright light emitting from its central spire. A 15-second screech is heard, and all other entities in view cease hostilities with one another and flee. A third entity appears alongside a deep humming sound, but the camera heavily distorts before cutting out. These final three entities are likely the three main contenders for victory, but we're left with no answer as to the winner. In most cases, humans meddling in affairs beyond their power or understanding results in disaster. But Daleport presents a situation in which not only was this meddling controlled, but it was apparently beneficial. The SCP Foundation were basically bystanders during these events, but in all likelihood, they would have ended up approving of the Victory Society's actions. It's usually a bad idea to summon a multitude of dark gods to a small town to wage war on each other, but sometimes you've got to break a few eggs to make an omelet. Halloween SCP-1730. What happened to Site 13? For the greater good is a phrase that has been used in various forms throughout history to justify certain actions that would normally be considered abhorrent. The SCP Foundation in general, of course, operates largely on this principle throughout most of their work, but often is the case where the Foundation is ultimately correct in their choice of actions. SCP-1730 is a grand, detailed report of a situation where the Foundation was profoundly, terribly wrong. SCP-1730 is easily among the lengthiest articles on the SCP Wiki, and although the actual description of the SCP is fairly short, the numerous logs, recovered materials, and interviews make this an epic report. In this video, I'll attempt to summarize and explain 1730 as best as I can, but keep in mind that I'll be cutting out quite a bit of atmospheric details along the way. SCP-1730 ultimately both asks and answers the question of what exactly happened to Site-13, and we see immediately that 1730 is listed as neutralized, meaning that it's either been destroyed, its anomalous properties have been removed, or it is no longer a part of our existence. 1730 itself is a large complex of structures, with identifying markers showing that it was known as the SCP Foundation's Site-13. Foundation records, however, show that Site-13 was originally planned to be built, but the plans were scrapped. The site was going to be built in Alaska, which seems to be where 1730 is from, which makes it stranger that it is located in Texas. The site seems long abandoned, is in a severe state of disrepair, and there are a number of fuel leaks and fires throughout the facility due to the power generator continuing to operate in a damaged state. Despite this, there is believed to be human survivors somewhere in the lower parts of the facility, as messages have been found on walls throughout the site, including the words danger, bleed, and the phrase, "What happened to Site-13?" The Foundation has established a simple containment procedure due to the site's remote location, but ultimately they decided to send in some teams to properly explore it. Our first piece of major info comes from a recovered log from a recovery team working for Site-13. They were apparently sent to retrieve and recontain an anomaly, and the log describes the anomaly crawling into one of the team's mouths, causing blood to leak from every orifice. Afterwards, two anomalies come out of the body, with one drinking up all the blood, and the other going back into the dead body, reanimating it. The remainder of the team puts down their reanimated squad mate, but the writer of the log admits that they don't have much longer, says something that was expunged from the record, and states it's just a matter of time before it starts. Interestingly, the expunged section was removed because it was marked as a cognitohazard, something that is dangerous for some reason to an individual when recorded with any of the 5 senses, in this case, likely sight. The log describes the team using C4 explosives to blow up the wall, rendering something illegible, likely the cognitohazard, but says it doesn't matter because Jones already went quiet like the others, and they shoved him down an elevator shaft. Finally, it mentions how someone started up the Thresher, which we'll learn about later. The next piece of info is an automated message describing the states of the various systems of Site-13. We see that it was sent minutes before an electrical disturbance and an explosion in the power relay, and shows that nearly every system is offline or compromised, including the Keter-class containment systems. Additionally, the Euclid-class containment systems and the reactor are both in critical status. Finally, we're brought into the present, with the exploration log transcript for the first team sent into Site-13 by the Foundation. The team is the D-12 Mobile Task Force, known as the Mudslingers, and consists of 6 members, including the captain. They enter through the unlocked front doors, switch on their lights due to the darkness, and immediately find messages written on the walls, including the ominous phrase, "Don't look at the walls." They find a service elevator that's still powered, and descend to the 3rd basement level. The team splits up to search the floor, finding that the rooms are filthy, due to being covered in some sort of metallic-smelling sludge. They see a makeshift barricade next to a door, and they also find a few bodies, half submerged in the sludge. A snake-like creature emerged from one of the bodies' mouths, which they immediately terminated, and discovered that the bodies were in fact hollow. The team agrees to return to the elevator, only to find the layout of the floor has changed, meaning they are either hallucinating or the building is physically changing. They head down a hallway which seems to be much longer than the building schematics show, and break down a door into an office. They find a naked human, with fire seemingly burning out of its ears. An intense white light, the sound of searing meat, and static from the team's microphones is all Site Command receives for over a minute, until they also hear the sound of slithering, a cry, and choking sounds. Other strange sounds come through the microphone until the other two members who had split away from the group finally respond. They are currently waiting near the elevator and thought their radios had stopped working, until suddenly their camera feeds show them in a different room, with one of them hanging upside down, facing each other, and both are completely stark white. Blood from their mouth, nostrils, and eyes cover their faces, and a large object moves in the background, accompanied by the sound of slithering from multiple directions. One of the team members opens their eyes, and the video and audio feeds cut out. This was the last Site Command heard from the Mudslingers. Clearly, exploration of the main structure was going to prove to be quite dangerous, so until the Foundation could set up a more prepared second attempt, they decided to send in a small team to the power station to assess the damage. MTF Y-24, known as Gulliver's Travelers, is a three-man team who went to the power station, only to discover the first set of doors inside to be locked and bulletproof. Rather than using explosives, which would risk a collapse, Site Command tries to find someone who would possibly know the clearance code for the door. Despite this site never actually being constructed in this reality, Director Jameson's clearance code from when this site would have been built manages to get the team in. The team examines the power cores, and then releases a micro-drone to provide a closer look, revealing that 7 of the 12 cores are damaged beyond repair, 3 are not functioning at full power, and 2 are, although one of those is currently superheated. The team finds more of the sludge that the other team encountered, and then sees 10 stark white bodies bound to the superheated core with wire. Underneath them, seemingly written in blood, are the words, "What happened to Site-13?" The team descends a stairwell, finding a door at the bottom that has been pried open, and discover a disgusting smell before their camera feeds begin to distort. The audio feed then cuts out completely, and Site Command only receives intermittent communications for 15 minutes, during which the team seems to be encountering more of the dead humans covered in sludge. Finally, it seems as if they encounter one that appears to be alive, before Site Command totally loses contact with the team. The recovered sludge from the micro-drone appears to be blood and power core residue mixed with an unknown biological matter. 1 week later, the team's video feed comes back online for 13 seconds, during which it shows a number of humans standing and looking down at a table. The Foundation still needed more time to prepare for the next exploration team, and so decided to send in an unmanned drone to hopefully investigate the lower floors of the main complex. The drone was launched through the same door that the first team entered, and began to descend in the elevator towards the lowest basement floor. After descending 7 floors, a power failure causes the elevator to stop, and so the drone forces the doors open, and descends manually to the 8th basement floor, a Euclid containment wing. After inspecting a number of rooms, the drone sees a vaguely humanoid entity standing near the end of the hallway. The drone follows the entity, as it doesn't seem to notice it, and watches as it picks up some of the sludge on the floor and marks a nearby wall. The symbols on the wall are later revealed to be cognitohazards, which the drone takes pictures of, and continues to follow the entity, which curiously leaves behind no footprints in the sludge. The drone enters the actual containment area, finding a cell containing a human form covered in sludge, with sparks emanating from its fingertips. A sign on the doorway states that Entity 324 is scheduled for termination in December of 1975. The drone finds another cell that had been locked shut. After forcing it open, the drone sees a dead female on the floor, with no sludge in the room. An identification badge on the corpse contains the name Jack Bright. Dr. Bright is a notable individual in the SCP universe, capable of immortality through jumping into different bodies, due to the use of SCP-093. The drone descends to the next floor, finding a working computer terminal, which is running an older version of the SCP Foundation operating system. The drone begins to transmit what files it can access back to command, but soon they lose contact with the drone. It's at this point that the cognito hazard that Site Command had viewed earlier triggered, causing affected individuals to go silent and begin to burn from their ears. Any audible sound after this would trigger a silent explosion, shaking Site Command and destroying most of their communication equipment. The drone finished transmitting files, but the drone itself was never recovered. I'll skip ahead for a moment to discuss the various files that the drone transmitted back. First, a correspondence from an engineer to the site's chief biologist and assistant director of anomalous biology, Dr. Hadley. Hadley was apparently working with the mysterious Thresher device, and the engineer informed her that although the reactors could surge to power the device, the reactors would likely not survive the process. The engineer goes on to say that the Thresher device is still wildly unstable, and utilization of it would likely destabilize local reality. Another correspondence from an individual who is both on the SCP Foundation's Ethics Committee and the head of the Global Occult Coalition's Ethics Board tells Dr. Hadley that she is not permitted to transfer out of Site-13. Additionally, Dr. Hadley seems to have an issue with Site-13's director and the protocol of terminating humanoid SCPs. The individual informs her that these anomalies are not considered human beings, and are not entitled to any of the rights that human beings are. Next, a test log shows a number of reality benders being exposed to dangerous conditions while wearing inhibitor devices, to see if they can change reality to save themselves. Exposure to extremely cold and hot temperatures, as well as electricity, caused the reality benders to die without them stopping it, while water submersion seems to interfere with the inhibitor device, causing unknown results. As a side note, the administrator of the test is listed as a doctor with only a number identification, not a name, in contrast to how the SCP Foundation usually does things. A message from one engineer to another discusses a buildup of toxic waste in the pit beneath the reactors. The waste is supposed to be piped off-site, but keeps getting built up, which will likely lead to a very serious issue. A note from Director Emerson states that the entire humanoid wing of the facility is to be promptly terminated by electrocution and incineration. It's this process that is seemingly causing the buildup of waste. Another message from an engineer to Dr. Hadley says that he altered termination records for a leech boy that was taken down to the pit. Since the output of the pit is still blocked up, he won't go anywhere. Finally, we get a message from Dr. Hadley to Director Emerson, in which we get a number of new details. The message discusses a containment breach caused by Dr. Hadley, and mentions that Emerson was foolish for thinking that killing the anomalous entities would stop them, as them being living is the least anomalous thing about them. Dr. Hadley goes on to discuss a young boy named Elijah, who subsisted only on blood and could drink it through someone's skin, much like a leech. He had the mental capacity of a toddler and did not choose to be this way, but Emerson had him incinerated like the rest. Of course, the incineration didn't actually kill Elijah, and him interacting with the bloody sludge caused a highly anomalous process to occur, in which the dead SCPs returned, in a way. In addition to this, of course, the Thresher device was eventually activated, causing the local reality of the site to heavily distort, leading to one highly anomalous facility. The Foundation still needed a more complete understanding of the facility, however, and so another team was sent in to explore its depths. This team, MTF-Z9, called Mole Rats, were specifically experienced in exploring anomalous locations, so they would be best prepared for the reality warping effects inside.
The 5-man team entered the main structure, equipped with helmets that would filter out any of the writing on the walls to avoid cognito hazards. They descend the stairs to the 6th basement level and begin to explore the floor, walking past sludge and bodies, when suddenly the floor collapses underneath one of the team members, Z9-4. The fall injures his leg, leaving him immobile, and the rest of the team look for a stairwell to descend. The injured member begins to hear slithering sounds around him, unable to see his surroundings. Gunshots ring out through the facility as one of the members, Z9-3, watching his injured teammate, sees a leech-like creature approaching him. The creature enters Z9-4's mouth and begins sliding down his throat. Z9-3 attempts to shoot the creature, but misses, and asks the captain for permission to shoot Z9-4 to put him out of his misery. He gets no response from the captain, but after Z9-4 lets out a choking plea, he fires his weapon. The floor further collapses, causing Z9-3 to fall and get crushed by debris. 5 minutes later, Z9-4 goes silent. A leech creature comes out of his mouth, and he stands up, picking up his dead teammate's weapon. Site Command received no communication from any of the mole rats for the following 3 hours, when suddenly communication from the 3 team members resumes, with them seemingly below the 15th floor. Z9-4's camera feed comes back for a moment, showing a number of humans with flames coming out of their ears, and a massive pit with a large creature in it covered in smaller creatures. Communication from the rest of the team eventually goes out again for 4 hours, before feeds from the captain resume again. She apparently reached the thresher device by herself, but she hears footsteps coming towards her. Her light goes out. She begins running through the darkness, and finally communication is lost once again. In the aftermath of this, it was clearly just too dangerous for a team to explore the facility, and so that would have likely been the end of the Foundation's research on 1730. However, one morning, monitoring equipment picked up a looped transmission coming from the facility. The transmission was from a doctor who worked at Site-13, who claimed that there were 12 people still alive in the facility, surrounded by hostiles and running out of supplies. Since the doctor claimed that the transmission would stop looping once he was dead, it seems that for the time being, there were living humans still in there. In light of this, the Foundation cleared a rescue mission. This is when things get really interesting. Another 5-man team was sent in to continue exploring the facility, and hopefully locate the survivors using the coordinates transmitted by the doctor. The team, MTF Apollo-3, Game Wardens, entered the main structure and went straight to the stairwell, hoping to use it to descend to the bottom floor. After traveling down it for nearly 10 minutes, the team finds that the bottom of the staircase is missing, abruptly cutting off into some sort of liquid void. Site Command informs them they are actually about 15 meters below where they thought the stairwell ended. The liquid begins to rise, forcing the team to ascend the stairs, although one of the team members gets his legs enveloped by the void. After pulling him out and up to the next floor, they find that his legs have been cleanly severed at the knees, but he can still feel them as if they were there, and most anomalously, he can actually stand. They pass their hands underneath him, and he appears to be simply floating, without feeling any different than normal. The team explores the floor, finding a rotting corpse they seem to recognize as their friend Zachary, unaware that it is dead. This is seemingly SCP-1500, and its anomalous effects are going through the team's visors designed to filter out cognito hazards. The team continues to chat with the corpse until Site Command finally updates their visors, and they realize that it's just a body. They soon encounter a shimmering humanoid entity approaching them, warping the environment around it. One of the team members is apparently caught in its field of effect, hanging and twisting behind it. The team fires on the entity, but the bullets simply spin around it. The entity proceeds to attack one of the members with an appendage, but they deploy a miniature reality anchor, causing the entity to disperse. They find the member that was caught in its field and is now partially fused with the wall, ceiling, and floor, presumably dead.
This actually, this went on a bit longer than I was intending it to. So, yeah, I got nothing to say. I'm just gonna end the stream and, yeah, I don't know what I was doing here. I guess I made a little carrot, but it doesn't really look like one. But I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I'm just playing around with this texture painting stuff I learned, so yeah, I don't know. I got nothing else to say. It's already late. I'm just gonna end it here. So, like I always say, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask me here. Feel free to ask me on any other social media platform. It doesn't really matter to me, but yeah, a lot of what I'm doing here seems kind of confusing and a little bit of, like, I don't know, a bit overwhelming, but honestly, once you get into the workflow, I mean, it's as easy as just turning on a podcast or something and just, I don't know, like painting away or like making all these cool shapes. It's a lot of fun. It's very different from making music, like where you're actively listening and always like engaged. Here, I'm just kind of like, I don't know, I'm not even listening to like what this guy's talking about. I'm just passively listening to these like stories as I'm thinking of things to come up with. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just gonna end it here now. I'm already tired. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I don't know. I'm just gonna end it.